Okay. All right. Let's get this party started here. We'll get live on TikTok as well. Oh my God. Let's see. We'll go here. Just switch this up and say. Hey, look at that. Haven't done one of these in a hot minute. All right. Let's see what we got going here. One of the things that I have a problem with here is getting my. I don't know how to watch my stream on YouTube, which drives me nuts. Let's see if we can get this thing going here. That's not how you do it. Nope. That's not how you do it either. Oh, Lordy. Excuse me. Goodness gracious. Shame on me. Interesting. All right. So I watched this. Oh, man. Let me get going here in just a minute. What the hell? Okay. That's weird. I hate studio, honestly. It drives me nuts. Let's just get out of here real quick. We're going to get to this video in just a minute. But for now, let's just pull this up. This nice little bit of. Put this right. Let's resize this a little bit. Like, there we go. That's a pretty accurate description of the Republicans and Democrats in this country. But this video is actually, this little live is actually going to be about a video I watched by More Perfect Union about wealth inequality. I'm going to bring that video up here in just a minute. It's funny. It took me days to put together. I'm trying to come up with talking points on this thing. And I realized they call themselves the classroom. They're More Perfect Union. They're nothing but a propaganda wing. They're just nothing but spreading socialism and class warfare. That's all they do. But it took me forever to find enough substance in this video to even make it worth responding to. Let's see. I'm having trouble with my live quality, apparently. Don't know what the deal is going on there. Should be just fine. Let's have a peek here. At 30. My upload speed is good. I don't know why it's giving me that little error message, but it is for some reason. Doesn't really matter. It's interesting stuff. I'm going to bring it up here in just a minute, but I'm so sick and tired of hearing about wealth inequality because it's just such a bad measure of how the economy is functioning. It's just not a good measure for how an economy is functioning. The numbers, it just doesn't make sense. And the people who post stuff like this really are just doing nothing but, it's almost like they're just trying to get, I think that the best way to describe it is it's like rage bait, really. I think that's probably the best way to look at it, is that it's just rage bait. It's let me see if I can post something that makes people angry enough to click on my video, so that I can grow. And I get it. And it's an interesting thing. We talk about like legacy media, and how terrible legacy media is. And I'm like, legacy media is not doing anything but falling to the level of social media. That's all it's doing. It's following social media. It's following the new clickbait style of social media. So first to report, put information out there. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. Make the headlines as controversial as possible. Do those kinds of things so that I can grow my channel. And I don't care if I'm growing it on the back of a bunch of lies. I don't care if I'm sowing discontent. I don't care if I'm causing divisiveness. My only goal on social media is to just grow at any cost, and it doesn't matter what damage lies in my wake. Now, I'm just a tiny little creator, because I do my best. I'm not perfect. Nobody is, at trying not to get into that. And obviously I have my own biases. I'm a free market guy. I'm a libertarian. So, obviously I've got my own biases that play out here, but I try and just be, I think the problem I have the most is that I don't like bad arguments. And I think that the economic left, the big government, and on social media now, for some reason, communists and socialism and all that stuff's back. Um, they, it's disturbing how popular that stuff is getting, and how you have these huge creators out here doing this, spreading this misinformation, and they're miseducating a massive portion of America's youth. And we talk about different streaming platforms. In particular, you look at TikTok, I think, as one that you would say has um, a lot of issues in terms of how they do things, and the way they do things, um, in terms of what content they promote. And yeah, it's poisoning the minds of American youth. And the problem is, and the problem is that because Democrats and Republicans are so similar from an economic perspective, they don't have anything real to fight over. They don't have this situation where they're having actual arguments about economics. Well, that's a weird picture on my. Let's fix this. Yoink. There we go. So what happens is, we end up in these incredibly stupid conversations about stupid things like, all right, first of all, let me not say stupid. Right? I know some of these issues are very important to a lot of people, but it's the social issues that's what we're fighting about, because this is where these are the wedge issues where Democrats and Republicans can kind of draw a line and say, see how much different I am than that guy. But at the end of the day, the economic stuff is virtually identical. And that's a pretty serious problem. Let me see what I got here. If I can get into this, that's a pretty serious problem, because we're not having substantive conversations on, economic issues. All that's coming up with the economic stuff is class warfare. That's all it is. There's nothing else there. And so that's really disappointing. And I don't know what the fix is. I honestly don't know what the fix is. I think that I have many times considered just not doing this anymore. Like, I'm a tiny creator. I don't have the time to create to put out content as often as I would like to. But then I'm always like, hey, one voice, one guy, if you can reach a couple of people here and there, make people think, make people engage in maybe more meaningful conversations, maybe you can make a tiny bit of a difference. And enough people do that, then, whatever. And I would get involved in the party and stuff like that as well, and support libertarian candidates and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's just, we're not having any meaningful conversations out there. And so my goal is, if I can find some time to get on here every once in a while, maybe take down something that's just, I don't know how to put it, but just an awful, horrible piece of bad content, and say, look, these people are lying to you about things. They're just lying. Or they're at the very least, they're being incredibly disingenuous. And so that's where I'm trying to go. It's the stuff I'm trying to do here. So I'm going to get into this video. I'm trying to get my view up here so I can see the feed on YouTube. This happens to me every time because I'm not. Oh, I could hear the okay boomers out there. I'm not a boomer, everybody, just in case you're wondering. But I can hear the okay boomers out there right now, just from the fact that I can't quite figure out my technology. Every time I get on here, it's the exact same thing. I can't figure out how to get to to actually see my live feed on YouTube. So I can't even see the comment section on the YouTube channel. And then I click around and eventually it pops up and I get it figured out. Let's see, that's not what I wanted to do. And eventually it just magically works, but I never know how to, do it. Let me just see here. Oh my God. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. I'm on TikTok and I'm on YouTube at the same time. So if somebody wants to comment, you probably have to jump over into YouTube or into TikTok until I can figure out how to get the comments going on the other side. But here, with no further ado, let's bring up this video. And this is what gets me is when I watch a video like this, it's the information is so bad. It's just so terrible. So let's jump in here and we'll just jump in here and play it, and we'll go from there. Let's blow this up here.
Income taxes for the high.
But let me start by saying I had to get 4 minutes into this video before I got anything of any substance whatsoever. He spends the first few minutes kind of as a prank. He's running around with a giant check. I should give this check to the billionaires and that'll save me time, because essentially not taxing wealthy people more is the same thing in his mind as stealing money right out of his own pocket. So he's like, well, I might as well just run and give this money right to them. Obviously silly nonsense, but let's take a look.
Highest earners, a 20% cut from 70 to 50. The tax rate on the lowest earners was only cut 3%.
So let's talk about that. I guess we'll start there. That's where it ends.
Reagan
right?
also lowered state tax.
So he talks about state taxes, corporate taxes, but this tax on the top earners, they only got a 3% tax cut. Now he talks about a 20% tax cut at the top end from 70 to 50%. But when he says the lower income earners only got a 3% tax cut, he knows he doesn't talk about the rates that they're paying. That's because at the low end, the people that he's specifically talking about are people who are paying 14% in income tax and are now paying 11%. Well, if you throw those numbers in there, that's all of a sudden doesn't seem as such an evil thing, does it? One group is paying a top tax rate of 50%. The other group is paying a tax rate of 11%. So he doesn't want to talk about the actual tax rates because, and this is how they do this, right? Now, we all know, everybody who's taken any time to study any of this stuff understands that top earners pay the overwhelming majority of the taxes in this country. That's not any kind of a mystery. It's not a secret. Everybody knows that. It's not something I think that people will argue anymore. Even people as far as on the left as you can possibly get, I don't think that people are going to argue that. So the question you have to ask is, and I'm still trying to get this figured out. I should stop messing around with it. So the question you have to ask is, well, why don't they just tell the truth, right? So the problem is that if you're going to sow division in class warfare, the first thing you have to do is where that fair share number comes into play. Where you hear people talking about people aren't paying their fair share of taxes, right? Well, why don't they just where it has to start? Oh, look what I did. So you get into that, you get into the whole fair share thing. Well, now we can start having this conversation the way we want to have this conversation, which is from the perspective of jealousy. They're not paying their fair share. We're not going to define what fair share is, right? We're not going to talk about the fact that the top 10% of income earners in this country pay something like 90, 80, 70, 90, 80% of the taxes of all federal revenue collected. They're paying all the taxes, the overwhelming majority of the taxes. So when you have a tax cut to try and stimulate economic growth, then guess what's going to happen? If you want that tax cut to have an actual impact in the economy, then then the people who are paying the largest percent, the goal is in a tax cut as an economic stimulus kind of a deal, is to leave enough money in the private sector, which produces everything, to have an actual impact on economic growth. So let's say you want to reduce the tax burden by $300 billion. I'm just throwing a number out there. And so, because you think $300 billion left in the private sector is going to help stimulate economic growth. Well, it's going to be the top income earners who are going to get the majority of that tax cut because they're paying the majority of the money. If the tax cuts were overwhelmingly for the bottom, let's say 50% of income earners, you could eliminate their taxes completely. It wouldn't leave enough money in the private economy to make the economic impact that a major tax cut as stimulus would be ineffective. There wouldn't be enough money there to make an impact in the economy. But they always talk about that because the goal is this false idea that there's a group of people who just aren't paying their fair share, even though they're paying the overwhelming majority of the tax. It doesn't get any simpler than that, really. And it's a false argument. It's not real. So the other thing, so somebody just commented that your facts are just incomplete. That's the deception. Waste of time here. Just talk. Okay. Thank you for that, by the way. I'm pointing out incomplete information. This is incomplete information. Okay, but let's get into it a little further. So I get almost into 9 minutes here before anything else of substance comes up. It's an amazing thing. I'm going through the Trump tax cuts, and he talks about Duke Energy. The whole thing is insane because he's talking about like layoffs then, and he's talking about the corporate tax rate. What's funny to me is that we talk about the corporate tax rate, how we need to raise corporate taxes. And most Democrats now will attack Trump because tariffs are going to end up raising prices on consumer goods in the United States. That's a valid actual argument. Yes, if you put tariffs on foreign goods, that's going to raise prices. So it was a terrible economic plan. Trump's economic plan isn't any good. He's going to slap on all these tariffs. He's going to do the mass deportation when we have a labor shortage in this country. All these things. Fix immigration. Mass deportation isn't fixing immigration. You got to fix the immigration process. But that's we could do a whole nother video on that. But Trump's economic plans aren't any good. It's just not. And the problem is, or what I find amusing is that so when we talk about tariffs, Democrats will tell you that tariffs are going to raise prices on consumers. So I, as a libertarian, as a free market guy, who is an anti-tax guy, will come in and I'll say something along the lines of, yeah, that's right. Tariffs will raise taxes on the consumer. So do corporate taxes. They're both pass-through expenses that the consumer ends up paying. When I go online and I say, look, raising corporate taxes is stupid. If you really want economic growth, higher wages, better competition in the global marketplace to bring manufacturing back to the United States and all these different things, eliminate the corporate tax. Make this the cheapest place to do business. Have no corporate tax. That's just a pass-through expense anyway. And what I always hear back is, no, you can't just pass taxes onto the consumer because we're in a competitive marketplace. I'm like, well, if we're in a competitive marketplace and you can't pass taxes onto the consumer, then how are tariffs going to raise prices for the consumer? It's all circular because it's not about the economics. It's about defending the party that a particular person believes in. I believe in this political party, and therefore whatever they say I have to defend, even if it's clearly. No, I'm not. I just said, so I said a comment just pop up. I'm trying to justify Trump's tariffs. I literally just said it's a terrible economic idea and it's going to raise prices for consumers. But when you hear what you're hearing through the filter of your ideological belief, it's not even an ideological belief, your red team, blue team filter, then, okay, I can only hear this. Here's what I'm hearing. You're making sounds and my mind is translating it into something that I have to attack because you don't appear to be on my side. So whatever you're saying, I have to argue against. If tariffs are a cost that is going to get passed on to the consumer, so are corporate taxes. That's it. It's that simple. But what I hear is, we're in this competitive environment, and so you can't just simply pass corporate taxes. They just can't pass those taxes on to the consumer, but they can pass tariffs on to the consumer. Well, I got a secret for you. All those taxes get passed on to the consumer. Everything the company pays for, their taxes, their electricity, their wages, the property taxes on their buildings, every single cost that corporations pay, you're paying for when you use their goods and services. That's it. Period. Every single cost, let me say it again for the people every single cost a corporation pays is paid for. That's how they make a profit. They make a profit because after they pay for all those things, they've taken enough money from the consumer to cover all those costs and have money left over. That's what a profit is. So the idea that we should raise taxes on corporate America is the idea that, you know what we should do? Just make everything more expensive, just like tariffs will do, just like mass deportation will do. All these are bad economic ideas. You need to. The only good thing Trump's got going for him is probably, and and I'll get into the problem with it, but is his desire, his stated desire anyway, to roll back a ton of regulations, to deregulate the economy, to free up the economy. Those are good things. The problem I have with Donald Trump is he had 4 years to do it and he didn't. He talked drain the swamp his first time around and he didn't do it. So I don't trust that Donald Trump is going to do that. I trust that Donald Trump is going to do the worst things in his economic plan, because I think that stuff appeals to his base, and he's not going to do any of the good stuff because that's kind of what he did last time. So I don't really have faith in him in terms of shrinking the government, getting spending under control, getting the debt. He has no track. His track record says, even pre-pandemic, his track record says he's not going to do those things. He's going to continue to run up massive deficits. He's going to continue to spend recklessly. He's going to keep doing those things. So I don't have faith that he's going to do it. He talks a good game, but at the end of the day, he's going to be the same guy who was elected in 2016, who governed for 4 years and didn't shrink government at all. I mean, he had some good stuff with the regulations. A couple of good things he did. Let me give him a little bit of credit. He got us out of TPP, which I was happy about. He got us out of the Paris Climate Accords. If only by accident, I think the world was more stable, only because he is unpredictable. But I think that's a little bit of pace and lead, where he says, these crazy kind of out of pocket things, and then leads from a different position. So I think he was better on foreign policy. It's pretty hard to argue that he wasn't better on foreign policy. But he didn't shrink the military budget. He didn't. I guess at the end of the day, the president of the United States has power over the cabinet positions to shrink government kind of unilaterally in a lot of ways, and from a structural perspective. And this is the argument I will make against both candidates. From a structural perspective, they're going to leave the structure in place that has led us to this global military empire, slaves to the military industrial complex, massive deficit spending, massive inflation. These are long-term structural issues that have survived Democrats and Republicans for decades. And neither of these candidates I do not believe that either of these candidates are going to come in and change that. And I think that no matter what they do, whether they do a little good over here and a little bad over there, from a structural perspective, the government's going to look exactly the same. It's going to be every bit as it's going to look every bit as oversized, too much money, too much everything, too much government in our lives when they leave. I'm just getting asked if I oppose a 20% across the board income tax on all income above $400,000. Yes, of course I do. Of course I do. I oppose the income tax flat out. I just oppose, we shouldn't tax people's labor. If we're going to have taxation to fund the government in this country, the only way to do it is in a way that to some extent can be opted out of. So I would look at probably a consumption tax. But in order to get a consumption tax, before we did a consumption tax, I would say we have to repeal the 16th Amendment, so that the income tax, once again, would have to be a constitutional amendment. So you would have to eliminate the income tax, eliminate the IRS, and then I would be potentially on board with going to a straight consumption tax, though. As a libertarian, I think that we can fund government, and I know people think this is crazy. I think we can fund government voluntarily. My definition of tax, I've always looked at tax as kind of like taxation is the way they get us to pay for things we would otherwise not pay for, by telling us we wouldn't pay for things that we would pay for. Does that make sense? We don't want to pay to fund all this foreign conflicts. We don't want to pay for a war on drugs. We don't want to pay for mass incarceration. We don't want to pay for that stuff. The American taxpayers don't want to pay for that stuff. In order to get us to pay for that stuff, they're like, well, if we don't tax you, you're not going to have roads. That's how they do it. That's how they get you. And I just don't believe that to be true. So I agree with what you're saying in terms of the GOP, but not Trump. So my thing with Trump, again, I'll reiterate, he just didn't do it the first time around. So I don't know that I can trust him this time. I just don't know that I can trust him this time. He could have ended the Department of Education when he was president. He could have ended, there's a lot of stuff he could have done that he didn't do. I mean, you look at who he hired, who was in his cabinet, who the people he brought in were, from the guy who said he was going to drain the swamp. It just wasn't the case. Now, look, he's only going to have one term if he gets elected. Maybe he goes scorched earth. One of these two people is going to win. It's going to be Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. One of those two people is going to be president of the United States. Right? It's a pleasant thought. One of those two people is going to be president of the United States. So the question you got to ask yourself is, who would you rather have as president of the United States? If you put a weapon to my head and said you have to make a choice between these two people, or we're gonna unalive your kids, or something that would force me into a position where I'm voting for one of these two candidates, it would be Donald Trump, only because Kamala Harris is selling the status quo. Like, Donald Trump is at least selling, I'm gonna go scorched earth and we're gonna shrink the government and we're gonna do all these things, and maybe he will. But I think we'll have a secure border. I think that's important. He's not going to fix immigration, unfortunately. I do think that, look, I said this in 2016 when he was running against Hillary. And part of Hillary's, people have short memories. Part of Hillary's campaign was that she wanted to put no-fly zones over Syria, including not allowing Russia to fly in Syrian airspace. And I said in 2016, that if Hillary Clinton gets elected president, it's going to be World War III. We're going to be in a hot war with Russia. And I was in the service in the 90s, and we've been gunning for Iran since the 90s, since before then, obviously. And the Democrats want war with Russia. And I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I'm not going to pretend like I'm privy to some kind of special information. Like, I know more than anybody else. But I know that, and what freaks me out about that is Kamala Harris is maybe the ultimate puppet in terms of, if she gets into the White House, she will be the ultimate. This is what the military-industrial complex wants. This is what the international banking system wants. They want a global conflict. And for me, I look at it and I say the debt cycle has become untenable. We're paying $3 billion a day in just interest on our debt right now. So when you get into a debt situation, well, how do we reset this? We set it with a massive global conflict. We could fix it without doing that. Like I said, eliminate the corporate tax, make America the most competitive place to do business, deregulate the economy to the greatest possible extent, make energy as cheap as possible, which is a Trump policy, by the way, which is something he did. He did do a good job on energy. I'm trying to give him his kudos where he deserves them. You make us the most competitive place to do business. You don't need tariffs to do that. You eliminate the corporate tax, which lowers costs for consumers, makes the United States the most attractive place to do business. And then you just gut the federal government. You shrink the federal government down to a point where we're not running these massive deficits. The economy will grow fast enough that our GDP will once again exceed our debt to GDP ratio will start shrinking, and we can actually start reducing the amount of debt. That's a possibility that can be done, but I don't know that he's going to do it. That's the goodness gracious. Yeah, just copy Malay in Argentina, 100%. 100%. Biden has restrained our forces from ensuring Ukraine wins. I mean, is it your position then that you want the United States, U.S. troops in Ukraine so that do we want a hot war with Russia? Are we willing to risk a nuclear exchange? People talk about this a lot. They're like, they compare Putin to, Germany in the 1930s, they're drawing World War II comparisons. The difference between now and World War II is a couple of things. The most important one of those things is we have two nuclear powers. We're in a nuclear world right now. So the idea that he's just going to try and roll over NATO, he knows if he rolls into NATO, this is a nuclear war. Like, he knows that. Thank you so much. So he knows that. So the idea that we're going to appease, we're going to take the appeasement strategy, right, and that's going to be a problem with Putin because we're appeasing him the same way we did Hitler. I summoned his name, so TikTok might ban my freaking live here. But if we're going to compare him to Hitler in the appeasement strategy, well, there's a pretty significant difference. First is the bonds of NATO, which it didn't exist then, and second is the fact that we're nuclear, and third is the fact that he's, like it, don't like it, whatever. Ukraine is a former Soviet state. Kamala Harris is over there talking about Ukraine should be allowed to join NATO, which is an absolute red line for Putin. We shouldn't be involved in this mess. We carry a lot of blame for what's going on between the Ukraine and Russia right now. And look, Trump's right on this one. The war just needs to end, whatever it takes to get the fighting to stop. Because the idea that Putin's going to take this expansionist position and try and roll through Europe it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And if that's what Putin wants to do, then we're on the clock for a nuclear conflict. If he loses in Ukraine and his goal was global conquest, then he's just going to go nuclear if he's losing anyway. If you watch the Victoria Nuland interview, she just came out. She admits we ended their peace talks. Yeah, that's it's just crazy stuff, man. It's just crazy stuff. What's going on over there? Yeah, and we stopped the peace talks. The whole thing is just nuts. It's just nutty what's going on. Thanks for the follow. I appreciate it. So this mess in Ukraine needs to end. Whatever it takes. I don't care if we give up some territory. I really don't care. We just need to, this just needs to end. It just needs to end. And I think if there's a reason to vote for Trump, if there's a reason to hope that Trump wins, it's because I believe the conflict in Ukraine will come to an end very quickly after he is elected. I do believe that. As far as the Israel thing and whatnot, I don't know I don't know how that ends. Honestly, I don't. I don't know how he gets that to stop because I think Israel is completely off the chain right now. I don't think that, and when I say off the chain, I'm not using a slang. There is no restraint. I remember the Gulf War. And I remember Iraq taking pot shots at Israel with Scud missiles to try and get them into the conflict to break up the coalition during the Gulf War. And we were able to restrain Israel. They didn't return fire. They maintained a defensive position out of respect for us and the coalition and all that stuff. I think Israel's done. And I think that does speak a little bit to the administration that's in office right now, that they don't garner that level of respect. Internationally, globally, I don't think they look strong. And so I don't think Israel has faith in the American administration right now to have their back and to get the kind of settlement that would make it viable for them to agree to a ceasefire. So I think that's the problem there. I'm not taking a particular side in that conflict. I know everybody's like, you have to be pro-Israel, pro-Palestine. The whole thing's a mess, man. And this stuff goes back, it's biblical, or this stuff goes back thousands of years. You think we're not going to solve this by marching in the streets of the United States? That conflict is going to be going on look, whatever Einstein said, I don't know what we're going to fight World War III with, but World War IV, the next war will be fought with sticks and stones or whatever. It's 100% accurate. They'll be fighting when we're fighting with sticks and stones. It's never going to end. It's a blood feud. We shouldn't be involved in it. I think Israel has a right to exist. I think so does Palestine. I guess I'd be a proponent of a two-state solution. Hamas and Hezbollah have to be eradicated. So how do you do that without civilian casualties? So it's a mess. The Middle East is a mess. I'm not the intellectual guy who's going to be able to come up with a solution to that problem, but it's a mess. But I do believe that the election of Donald Trump will stay. I think that there's a genuine risk of a escalating global conflict. I think it's almost a guarantee if Kamala Harris wins. And I do think that global tensions will ease with Donald Trump back in the White House. And so if there's a reason to vote for him, I suppose that would be it. They're clear. Republicans are disgusting bigots. The disgusting bigot thing always cracks me up. It's like, that's like the most, just something in my comments section. It just gets my ire up a little bit that Republicans are like these horrible bigots. It's like, come on, man. Whenever I see a comment like that, I'm like, are you like a bot? Are you a real person? No offense. I'm not trying to, disparage anybody. I guess I shouldn't have said that. But look, at the end of the day, no, they're not. They're not. Wanting a secure border it's not racist. It's not xenophobic to say that we're going to control who comes into the country. If you want to talk about bigots when it comes to like LGBT stuff, listen, nobody thought marriage. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Joe Biden all in the 21st century have said marriage is just between a man and a woman. Does that make them bigots? It's the racist thing, the racism thing, and the bigotry and all that stuff. That's like, for me, that's like talking. That's here. Actually, that makes my freaking point. There's not a solid economic difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. So we have to argue about racism, abortion, transgenderism, and guns. That's what we talk about. We don't have meaningful, in-depth conversations about economics because there's not a significant economic difference between Republicans and Democrats. And that's why there hasn't been a significant difference in outcome over the last 100 years in this country. Since 2000, since 1913, the establishment of the 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment, and the Federal Reserve, this country has been moving in a very steady direction. And it's accelerating now, but this is why we argue about the things that we argue about. So I try not to get down into the mud in the nonsense of like, oh, you're a racist and blah, 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 blah. And what kills me is, and I remember I had this conversation in 2020 when we shut everything down and all this stuff. Economics is the most important thing. You got to get the economy right. The economy is what feeds you. The economy is what houses you. The economy is what provides healthcare. You got to get the economy right. All the other stuff is secondary to that. Nobody's going to care about any of this stuff if we have a currency crisis in the United States, if there's some kind of a hyperinflationary event in the United States. Nobody's going to care about any of this other BS that we spend 97% of our time talking about. Nobody's going to care about it if we don't get the economy right. And neither party is going to get is making an argument that they're going to get the economy right. And that's the problem. And that's why I don't support either of these. We can argue about Trump and Kamala all day long. I don't support either one of these people. So we can make those arguments all day long. I don't care. I will say this. As a 49-year-old with 4 kids, I would surrender my Social Security benefits if my kids had the opportunity to opt out. And I think a lot of people my age, not people who are already retired, not people who are living on Social Security. Most people my age already don't think they're going to get Social Security, or if they get it, it's not going to be worth anything. Okay. And when Nikki Haley, the only smart thing that came out of Nikki Haley's mouth during her disastrous campaign was that we need to reform Social Security. She's the only one who said it. It's the third rail of politics. Her campaign was, she knew she wasn't going to win. She said, and Trump called her out on it, on going after Social Security. If we're not going to fix Social Security and entitlement programs, then what are we doing? You're not going to fix, you can't solve the problem. You got to cut military spending by 50%. You've got to reform Social Security and sunset it. Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. If it wasn't a Ponzi scheme, everybody who's getting benefits right now would be able to continue getting benefits if nobody else ever paid another dime into Social Security. If you need young people to pay into the program to keep it functional, then it's a Ponzi scheme. By legal definition, it's a Ponzi scheme. If your financial advisor did to you what Social Security and the federal government did to you, your financial advisor would be in prison. Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. It needs to be sunset. We need to get rid of it. It needs to go away. We need to get people who are dependent on that program right now to the grave as promised. And we need to figure out a way to let people start opting out of this program. People maybe under the age of 40, under the age of 45, whatever, to opt out of this program. It needs to be sunset. That'll go a long way to solving a lot of our economic problems. Which I know that's incredibly unpopular. It's the reason it's the third rail of politics. I think it's the third rail. Is third rail or the fourth rail? I don't remember. But that's what you need to do. And nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody has the courage to talk about it. And that's, you want to talk about Trump and like he's the savior. He's going to turn all this around, make America great again. He's not willing to talk about it. He's not willing to address it. It's the biggest, it's the elephant in the room and nobody wants to talk about it. Third rail. Thank you for clearing that up for me. And that's the problem. If you're not going to talk about it, if you can't even talk about it, if you're scared to even talk about it, then you don't have the courage to lead. Sorry, you got to have that conversation. And so that's it. If you're not, you're just more concerned about getting elected. And like, I'm 50 and I would opt out tomorrow morning. Somebody says I would opt out. I would surrender my benefits. For me, it's so that my kids aren't burdened with this program. We talk about, I don't like the intergenerational stuff. Oh, the boomers did this, the boomers did that, and all this. I'm Gen X. Nobody talks about us, but I don't like the generational stuff. But I will say this. I will say that I think that the boomer generation, I hear a lot of, well, I paid into this program my whole life. It's not an entitlement. It's literally an entitlement. You're actually entitled to the money because you paid in. That's what an entitlement program is. Welfare is not an entitlement program. Welfare is a wealth transfer program. So we got to get our terminology right. We got to get the semantics right. Yes, people are entitled to their Social Security benefits. It is literally an entitlement program. But if I got involved with a financial advisor who stole my money, would I demand that my kids invest with him so that I could retire? No, of course not. Of course not. It's uncomfortable to talk about. It's uncomfortable to say, but it's the truth. Social Security needs to go away. It needs to be sunset. That's it. Period. It needs to be not a thing that we do anymore. So, and if there's not a politician who's willing to talk about it, if you're voting for somebody who's not even willing to talk about it or acknowledge it, then that's the one place Nikki Haley was right. But of course, Nikki Haley she's all in. She was all in on, like, talk about a warfare president. Talk about the choice of the military industrial complex. That was absolutely going to be Nikki Haley. Watch Trump make her Secretary of State or something. That'd make me laugh. Social Security, if people opt out, they will whine later about being poor after blowing their savings. Yeah, that's right. Freedom. So here's this crazy thing that people don't understand about living in a free society. There are risks with a free society and you need to be responsible for yourself. But here's the thing about Social Security that we don't talk about. One of the things about Social Security that we kind of gloss over is the fact that Social Security was never meant to be a long-term retirement program. It was an end-of-life program. It was end-of-life insurance. Okay. The Social Security retirement age when it was, I don't have the information right in front of me, but Social Security retirement age was early 60s, mid 60s when it was created, and it was directly in line with life expectancy. So it was never meant to be something that you collected for 20 years. It was never meant to be that. Well, okay. Let me correct that. I think that it was meant to be that, but it wasn't sold as that. If that makes sense. I think in the long run, that's what the progressives, the FDR and his progressive wanted, was for this to become a retirement program that people were dependent on. But at the end of the day, when it was instituted, you could fix Social Security tomorrow. Just peg it to life expectancy. And the problem solves itself. People collect Social Security for a couple of years and then they pass away. It's end of life insurance. This idea that we are supposed to live 20 or 30 years without working is like a miracle of modern capitalism. And it's a great idea. It's a great thought, but you have to spend and invest into the economy and become an asset owner in order to accomplish that. The government can't do that. The government doesn't have the means to do that. It's bankrupting the country because the government doesn't have the means to do it. If you want you have to have a functioning, growing economy where we have a stable currency, people can invest in their future and be able to live off of what they're able to collect. You cannot retire on the government dole. It can't be done. There's a reason our public schools are spending so much money and getting so little in return. The legacy costs of our public school system are astronomical because teachers retire at 55, something like that, 56, early. Teachers retire early with a lifetime pension. It's an unsustainable expense. It was the problem with the unions and the United Auto Workers, and the reason our auto industry got gutted. We had all this legacy expense built into every car because we had these unrealistic pension plans. We built our country. Okay, so just a little bit of kind of historical perspective, because one of the things that you hear a lot about is, in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, we had this incredibly high top tax rate. This is a talking point of the left. We had this really high top tax rate, and look how great everything was. Yeah. We built our country in the aftermath. Our modern economic system in the United States was built in the aftermath of World War II, when there was no global competition. And then the Japanese started eating our lunch in the 1970s. And Hondas and Toyotas started landing on our shores. And then the Germans started making stuff. And the Chinese eventually started making stuff. And so we've got this massive global marketplace. Well, when we had really high top marginal tax rates in this country and top corporate tax rates in this country, it's because capital didn't have any place else to flow. We built our country as if we were always going to be the world's only manufacturer. That was a bad choice. It looked in that time as if, when are we going to face any real competition from the rest of the globe? Now we're facing it. They're eating our lunch, and we've got these massive government programs that were built in the most optimistic era of American history that we just can't sustain anymore. And we have to have an honest conversation about them. So let me see here. I'm just taking a look at the comments, see what we got coming in here. Social Security, people opt out. Already hit that one. Better to have a choice than none at all. Thanks for the follow. They won't take responsibility. I'm okay with age 77 being full retirement. That's what I think should happen. Raise the Social Security retirement age to like 76, 77. And you'll solve the problem. Make it for people under my age and up. How about that? Or my age and under, I should say. I don't get to collect Social Security until I'm 77. Okay, I'm fine with that. And if I have to work a little bit longer, I'll work a little bit longer. It's okay. That solves a lot of problems. It solves a lot of financial problems for this country. Changes a lot of things. The Irish and Chinese built our infrastructure, and you're claiming that the Japanese undermined us. Okay, I don't even know why not 105. Well, my preference for Social Security would be for it to not exist, but if you're just joining, it's because when Social Security was first instituted, I'm just responding to a comment here. When Social Security was first instituted, it was very much a end-of-life insurance program where your retirement, the age at which you could draw Social Security, was in line with the life expectancy. It was not instituted as a lifetime retirement program. That's why. 105 is pretty solid, though. That's a great way to sunset the program, I suppose. I don't understand the point of the Irish and Chinese built our infrastructure, and you're claiming that the Japanese undermined us. I don't know if this must be one of the white people are evil. Is that like, I don't know the Irish people are white, so I guess that's not what it is. I didn't say the Japanese undermined us. We undermined ourselves by creating an unrealistic economic model based on the conditions of the world post-World War II. So the American economic model is unrealistic. It's not sustainable in a competitive global economy. When we set up a lot of this stuff in the 1930s and 40s, particularly in the 40s and 50s, we weren't facing any global competition. Capital didn't have any place else to go. We could have these massive top tax rates. We built everything. We were a massive exporter. We were not a debtor nation, all these different things. Well, that's all changed. And so, but we haven't changed the structure of the way that our economy is put together, the role that government plays in our economy. So Oh man. Anyway, what do we got here? I'm at 49 minutes. I'm gonna try and go 10 more. 10 more minutes. I'm tired. I'm old. I can't be doing these lives at freaking 9:30 at night. I'm gonna go out and have a smoke and go to bed. I don't know if there's comments popping up in my. I feel really bad that I can't figure out how YouTube Studio works to actually see my comments over there. I'm like such a dumbass. But hey, it is what it is, I guess. So sorry for you YouTube people if you're commenting and I can't get to you, but I am commenting back. I'm responding to comments. That's what keeps me going. This is why I can stay on here a little bit longer, because I'm responding to comments. I appreciate having an active comment section, even if most of you, I don't think most of you, some of you are throwing some hate my way. That's perfectly fine. I'm looking for the comment from, I can't remember who it was. Must have been Gree in there. I always like, here's what I like, is when somebody tells me that they really, really don't agree with me. Here it is. Disagree with a bunch, but you have very sincere, thoughtful positions, except for any role for Trump. If I can come across, this is my purpose in being on social media at my age as kind of a hobby, just want to have meaningful conversations and make decent arguments so we can have real conversations about things. Because I just feel like that's not what's happening in this country right now. And any voice, even if it's just one small, tiny little creator like myself, any voice that could come on here and say, look, I'm willing to have a conversation, but I want to have a real conversation. We're not going to do all this race baiting. I'm not going to have all these crazy ass conversations. Let's talk about realistic solutions. And if you can walk away disagreeing with me, but think, hey, that guy's not a jerk, but that's a step in the right direction. If we can have more conversations like that, that's a good thing. It's kind of why it's a funny thing, because I kind of like Charlie Kirk for going onto like universities, but he's such a right wing shill. It's like there's nothing, like he supports Trump's tariff. Anybody who supports Trump's tariffs, I'm like, either you're being disingenuous or you're economically illiterate. Same thing with the price gouging bit. It's like, we're going to have these price gouging rules. And so I'm like, all right, well, somebody tell me who in the food supply chain, right? So we can stop the price gouging. This is populism. This is the problem. We have two populist candidates running, and that's how you end up with bad economic policy. By the way, speaking of bad economic policy, I got a book today. This is my Economics, Facts, and Fallacies by my boy Thomas Sowell. I can't believe I haven't read this one yet. Anyway, you have two populist presidents running. They're going to sell popular ideas. Well, the population isn't bright. I know that's, if I ever run for office, I guess that's going to be something that comes back and bites me in the butt. You know, and they come back. TikTok's going to be the new Twitter, where it's like, oh, you said this thing on TikTok once and 15 years ago, and now your whole life is over. But when you have populist candidates running, they're going to have populist ideas. Thomas Sowell talked about this when we come to rent control. He's like, rent control is bad. It's a bad thing. Lots of reasons. Rent control is a horrible idea, but there are more renters than there are landlords, and more people who don't understand economics than people who do understand economics. And so it's always a good thing for a politician to run on, because politicians have a 2-year timeline. They don't have to deal with the long-term negative consequences of their bad economic decisions. So rent control is always going to be a popular thing. So anyway, so you have these price controls, and my question is that no Democrat's been able to answer this question for me yet. Maybe if there's one watching, doesn't look like there's anybody left. If there's anybody watching, my question would be, where in the food production and distribution pipeline is the price gouging taking place? Where are the profit margins in the food industry so high that they're clearly price gouging? I need to know that, because nobody's told me that. Is it the farmers? Is it the grocery stores? Like, who is it? I don't know who's out there doing this horrible price gouging, but I'd love somebody to give me an answer. Anyway, every time I do one of these, I say, hey, I'm going to try and do more of these. And then it seems like it's a week before I can get back. I'm going to try and do more of these. I really do mean it. But I will see you guys next time. I gotta fly. Didn't quite make it to an hour, but I'm running out of commentary. I'm running out of people commenting, and therefore I'm really, oh, you know what? I do have something. I do have one last thing I want to cover. This is the script for the More Perfect Union video I was responding to. So I ran some co-pilot stuff. This will be interesting. If you're sticking around, this will be some interesting stuff. This is about wealth inequality. What percentage of wealth resides at the bottom 50%? Okay, so as of the recent data, the bottom 50% of Americans hold about 2.5 to 3% of the nation's total wealth. This highlights the significant wealth inequality in the United States. So you want to talk about AI having a bias? Is this concentrated among the top earners? Blah 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 blah. So how much actual wealth does that represent? So the most recent data at the bottom 50% of Americans hold about $51,000 in wealth on average, 2.5 to 3% of the nation's wealth. In 1975, the bottom 50%, now this is important. In 1975, the bottom 50% held a larger share of the nation's wealth, around 4%. This decline over the decades highlights the growing wealth inequality in the United States. It keeps making that point. So what is the total? So I ask, what is the difference in total wealth between now and then? In 1975, the bottom 50%, it keeps regurgitating this, but it did get this into, to put this into perspective, we considered the total wealth, right? The bottom 50% would hold $3.5 to $4.2 trillion. In 1975, if their share of the wealth had stayed the same, they'd have $5.6 trillion. But that is a bad number because that assumes all the other economic things that went along with the tax cuts, all the economic growth, all this other stuff that happened would still have happened. We have the same amount of wealth. That's a bad assumption. This is an AI, right? Should know that, whatever. So I ask, how much total wealth was there in 1975? $10 trillion. It's $140 trillion now. So I scroll down here and ask a few more questions. In 1975, the bottom 50% of Americans held approximately $400 billion in total wealth. Today, the bottom 50% hold, it's up here again, 3.5 to $4.2 trillion. So in 1975, the bottom 50% owned $400 billion in total wealth, and the bottom 50% of income earners in the United States in 1975. And today they hold $3.5 to $4.2 trillion in total wealth. And the percentages at most have fallen 1.5%. They have 1.5% smaller share of the total wealth, but massively higher levels of wealth. And this is why the title of this thing was like debunking wealth inequality. I didn't get to it till the very end. That's why the wealth inequality argument is a stupid argument. This is the John F. Kennedy, a rising tide lifts all ships argument. We are so much more wealthy now that, yes, the bottom 50% have a marginally smaller percent of the overall wealth, but are significantly more wealthy than they were in 1975. So it's the wealth inequality argument. Now, in the short term, right now, we're feeling this massive inflationary pressure. A lot of that is pandemic, still literally pandemic related. A lot of this is global conflict related. There's just a lot of economic factors. There's just a lot of economic factors that can be attributed to the reason we're having all this inflation. But at the end of the day, it's the argument that the poor are getting poorer is just a flat out lie. And I will close on that. Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for all the comments. Guys, have a nice night. We'll see you next time. And for those of you on YouTube, if there's anybody still hanging around, thank you guys very, very much for sticking around. Follow for more content. I'm going to do a more edited, cleaned up version of this as an actual video to post. And obviously want to start posting a little bit more regularly. So do follow the channel, please. You can see I'm struggling to get to 300. 300 is going to be a big deal to me for some reason, even though it doesn't actually mean anything. I'm striving for 300. So